Welcome to our series on Pirkei Avot. We're on the second chapter and about to start the fascinating 8th Mishna, very lengthy and very compelling. And we'd like to dedicate this Mishnah as ever in memory of Elisheva Yael, Bat Levy, and Levy ben Moshe Esther, and also Shlomo ben Moshe Esther. Okay, and Michael, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mashiach. So we're in the final words of wisdom from Hillel. This will be the final Mishnah of this Perek, of this section, and so let's get stuck in. So, Hu Haya Omer, he used to say, Marbe Basa, the more flesh, Marbe Rimor, the more worms. Marbe Nachasim, the more property. Marbe Da'aga, the more anxiety. Marbe Nashim, the more wives. Marbe Keshafim, the more witchcraft. Marbe Shefachot, the more female slaves. Marbe Zimah, the more lewdness. Marbe Avadim, the more slaves. Marbe Gazel, the more robbery. Marbe Torah, the more Torah. Marbe Chayim, the more life. Marbe Yeshiva, the more sitting in the sitting in the company of scholars. Marbe Chochma, the more wisdom. Marbe Eitzah, the more counsel. Marbe Tuvuna, the more understanding. Marbe Tzedakah, the more charity. Marbe Shalom, the more peace. Kana Shem Tov, if one acquires a good name, Kana le'atzmo, he has acquired something for himself. Kana lo divrei Torah, if one acquires himself knowledge of Torah. Kana lo chai olam haba, he has acquired life in the worlds to come. So, a list of directives to of the pros and cons of life. So let's start with the first one. So the more flesh, what does this mean? And in ancient times, a physical sign of wealth would be to be rather portent and fat. If you could afford to eat, you'd eat. You could show that by eating as much as you wished, and you would, fat. You'd have, to be fat would be a sign of huge wealth. But Hillel saying, the more flesh you have when you die, the more food there is for worms to eat. So really showing both sides of life. What does Bartanura say about this? Bartanura says, the more flesh, the more worms. One who engages in much eating and drinking to the point that he becomes fat and fleshy increases the worms upon himself in the grave. And worms are as hard for the dead as a needle is for living flesh. And this teacher let us understand that all increase is difficult for a man except for the increase in Torah, wisdom, and charity. So, the more property, the more anxiety. Bartanura mentions about this. He comments, lest they rob him on behalf of the king's estate, or lest bandits come upon him and kill him. And a certain pious man would pray, may Hashem save me from the spreading of the soul. And they inquired from him, what is the spreading of the soul? He said to them that it means that his possessions should be numerous and spread out in many places. And he would also have to spread his soul out to think in the same direction. So the more possessions you have, the more properties you own, the more worries you have to have about obviously their upkeep and also what's going on. You can't be in two places at once, and if you have to look after a spreading of property, you have to perhaps hire people to and you have to trust them. So there must be a certain amount of anxiety connected to that. The more wives, the more witchcraft. Bartanura says, it makes an interesting comment here, that Hillel is mentioning them in a certain order. Bartanura says he went and mentioned it in order. At first, a man adorns himself and eats and drinks, and engages in eating much meat. And afterwards he seeks to acquire much property. And after he has acquired much property and he sees that he has enough in his hand to support many wives, he marries many wives. And after he marries many wives, each one needs a maidservant to serve her. And this is the more maidservant section. And since he has so many members of his household, he needs fields and vineyards to supply wine and foods to the members of the household, and so acquires many slaves to work in the fields and vineyards. Hence they are all learned in this order. So yes, we see the more slaves, the more robbery. But then we move on to the good things in life. The more Torah, the more life. This Rab Chaim of Volodin comments on this: more Torah, more life. Even if it requires personal sacrifice and suffering, Torah study prolongs life. The more study, the more schooling, the more wisdom. He also comments, it is common to find many Torah scholars in the yeshiva setting, many of whom are fit to be your masters. This presents a tremendous opportunity to acquire wisdom, as we discussed in Avot 2:5. He also goes on to comment on more advice, more understanding. Conventional wisdom suggests that we seek advice and then make a decision based on our own intelligence. If so, what is the purpose of taking counsel? An outsider, brilliant as he may be, cannot fully understand our situation because he does not have intimate knowledge of all the details. Only the consultant can fully appreciate the ramifications of his decision. He gathers nuggets of wisdom from all around, from whom he seeks counsel, and then with his enlightened understanding comes to the proper decision. Tuvunah is the ability to take knowledge and apply it in various areas. Thus, more advice, more understanding. For the consultant gathers the threads of much advice and weaves his own solution. We also saw this in Aseh L'chol Rav. We saw in a recent Mishna saying take advice from experts rather than a actual teacher, but take advice from experts. And what does Rav Chaim of Volodin comment on? More tzedakah, more peace. Even if one donates funds to charity which could have been used for a huge business deal, no harm will ever come to him, only peace.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, we see so many times people give insane amounts of charity and they come under fire, all sorts of criticism. Here the Mishna says clearly, don't worry, it's a good thing. You know, the commensurate loss may be felt in some way, but it can't even compare to the mitzvah and the reward you will get for that. It's like not even negligible. It's doesn't even exist in the face of the mitzvah. Okay, so I think, Michael, I just want to interject a story that I read in the Pirkei Avot Treasury, which I think is very relevant for this particular Mishnah. It's from the Baal Shem Tov. Now, anything you say from the Baal Shem Tov is a good chance it's apocryphal, as opposed to it really happened. With this, I assume it's just a parable. But anyway, it's a parable of a poor woman who lives in a run-down shack on the edge of the city, and of course, she would have to collect money from people, and every time she would take a donation of a few coins from a person, she would give the same response. She would say, everything man does, he doesn't do for others, he does for himself. And it was a standard response for her. And whenever people would give her charity, they knew she was going to say this response. So as she's collecting charity over the weeks and the months, she manages to go to the royal palace, and she seeks an audience with the queen, and she gets in, and the queen gives her a donation, and she says the same thing. Everything man does, he doesn't do for other people, he does only for himself. Okay, fine. So you say it once, you say it twice, and she kept coming back to the palace, and she would get more and more people. But the queen would give her a nice donation, and she would keep giving the same response, very enigmatic, weird response. And listen, you hear this once, twice. If you're a regular donor, okay, you could just say, look, this woman's a bit eccentric, etc. But this queen actually very rapidly started taking offense with this comment. Every time it was the same thing, and it doesn't sound like something that's respectful. It sounds like it's just denigrating. So the queen decided, you know what, enough of this. You know, she comes to the royal palace and she gives me this response every time. I'm going to teach her a lesson. So what does she do? She goes to the bakery. She's got a bakery in the palace, and she said, I want you to bake me bread, and in this bread, in the dough, I want you to put drops of poison in it. Yeah, the queen took a rather extreme response to this thing. Yeah, instead of giving a tochacha, she decided, I'll just get rid of her. So fine. So next time the woman comes in, the queen gives her the money that she normally gives, which is very nice anyway. But also she gives her a nice loaf of bread, and she says, thank you so much. And then she says, everything man does, he doesn't do for others, only for himself. And she takes the bread away, and fine. Now the queen's thinking, that woman's going to get it now. Forget it. I'm not going to see her anymore. So the woman takes the money home, and she takes the bread, and she decides, you know what? I'm not going to eat it now. This came from the royal palace. I need to have this on a different occasion. Probably she thought, I'll have it as lechem Mishna for Shabbat. I'm not going to have it now. So she puts it there, and she let it adorn her larder. Now, the next part of the story happens when the son of the queen, the prince, he was in the forest doing on a hunting trip, and of course he's here with his whole entourage, and they've been hunting all day. And the prince now was, and it's probably his servants as well, became very hungry, and they wanted to sort of settle down, and they see there was this rundown rickety shack in the middle of the woods. So they thought, okay, listen, I'll knock on the door. I hope the shack doesn't fall down. I'll go in and I'll see if there's anyone there who can give us like a drink or something. So, of course, that was the shack that belonged to this woman who was known inside the royal palace. So now, the woman, when she got the knock on the door, she opened the door. She saw it's the prince. You know, she says, "Oh, I know your mother, etc." And he said, "Okay, please, can I come in? You know, I'm very hungry, etc." And she says, "Of course you can come in." And she, without hesitation, she offered the prince something to drink, and of course something from this loaf of bread. And the prince was so hungry, he when the poor woman cut him a slice of the bread, he ate it very quickly, didn't even taste it, and then after one or two bites, he collapsed dead, because it was poison, of course. Now, this is before even the servants knew anything about it, and they were shocked. What were they going to do now? So, of all the people, it was the poor woman herself. She ran to the palace to tell the queen of this terrible thing that happened. And the queen, of course, realized what had transpired. It was her who inadvertently caused her own son's death. And she fainted. And then she got up. She turned to the poor woman standing before her. She didn't blame the poor woman. And she said, I now understand what you meant when you said everything man does, he does not do for other people, he does for himself. So here you see the terrible collateral damage that can come from an action that's really, it's a bizarre parable, because the queen couldn't have thought of anything less than to have her own son being killed by her own hand. But the Baal Shem Tov says you have to look at this from the other way. That if our selfishness causes such damage, what about our mitzvot? Our mitzvot, when we do our mitzvot, when we farm them out to everyone, could be a mitzvot we do for a charity organization, just or a personal chesed initiative. Could be whatever it is. How much more so they will come back to us and to give us benefit. So it's a win-win situation. You will benefit the person who needs the chesed, and it will come back to you in such a way that it will have devastatingly good ramifications for you, and it will engender more mitzvot for you. Okay, Michael, thank you so much. It was a very fascinating Mishnah, and now we've got to be very careful with our diet, not to have to eat too much and become a bal basar. And we look forward, Bezrat Hashem, to the next episode where we'll be discussing
Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai.
Okay, so have a wonderful and fantastic week.